Young man, I wish to speak to you today about pornography.
Every day I see men who wish they hadn't slipped off the edge and made their wives cry.
This was not a good thing to be doing, but like addiction happens, it just little by little, and I couldn't stop.
I was attacked by Satan from the cradle, and I never got a chance to experience mortality without this cloud over me.
I was so far gone that I had no idea whether it was the spirit or the adversary.
It's just a preconception that Satan has placed in us since coming into this world kind of as teenagers, that there's no way we could ever amount to anything.
Will you ever be rescued? Will you make it through your own survival story? The answer is yes.
This is a new weapon that Satan has been using.
Deception,
we're not talking
distraction,
about it.
discouragement.
I fight to watch men reaccess the power of God.
I am looking tonight.
It's not out there.
It's become far too normalized.
It's normalized.
For men, young and old.
I realize now that I am a warrior
who care enough about this battle between good and evil
against the adversary
to sign on and speak
if
up.
I turn my life around and be the person that they need.
We are at war. And for these next few minutes, I want to be a one-man recruiting station.
Welcome to the Eternal Warrior Podcast, helping young people in their quest for self-mastery, sharing stories from the battlefront in the war against Satan and pornography. Today, we have an amazing guest, someone who I've only known for a couple of months, but who's been helping out in life-changing services and in specifically for this podcast. It is our very own Susan. She's going to be talking about a very interesting topic. What did you call it again, Susan?
Mutualizing language.
Mutualizing language. And, at first, it seems like a good thing. Like, mutualizing is generally like, I don't know, one of those feel-good words for me.
It can be a good thing.
Yeah. From my understanding, that's not the direction we're going to take today.
Today we're going to talk about when it's not a good thing and when it can cause a lot of confusion and hinder healing for people.
It's not what you think it is.
Yeah. So before we get into the topic, we want to get to know you, Susan. So what brings you to life-changing services?
All right.
Not only that, but what's unique about you? How can we relate to you?
Okay. Well, I found life-changing services from a place of a lot of pain, like many of us do. And in my case, there was a lot of pain because of the discovery of my husband's misuse of agency. So for me, it was the W.O.R.T.H program that I found. And they kind of helped me find my feet again over time and untangle a lot of what I was dealing with, which, I didn't know how much I needed them until I found out how much I needed them. The community that I experienced there of women who just understood what I was dealing with was hugely helpful for me, way more than I could have imagined. And then understanding what my body was experiencing and what my mind was experiencing because of what I experienced in my marriage was so eye-opening. I learned so much about how trauma can influence someone and what that experience can be like. I knew that I had pre-existing trauma from my childhood, but I didn't know what the difference was to what I was currently experiencing. And I didn't know that betrayal trauma can trigger childhood trauma. So I was experiencing all of the previous trauma in my life, of which there was quite a lot, triggered by what had just happened. And I didn't understand the depth or how badly I was drowning. Fortunately, another wonderful woman of worth saw what I was dealing with and realized how much I needed the program. And then she introduced me to the program. And then I took a month before I actually acted on it.
Yeah. What is the Worth program? From what I understand, it's like a kind of a volunteer effort to help women who face trauma.
Actually, it's much more than that.
Okay.
At this point, maybe it started out that way, but it's much more than that now. So the Worth program has support, lots of support for women who are experiencing betrayal trauma as a consequence of the misuse of agency in their partners when they are dealing with pornography addiction or sex addiction. The influence that has on a partner is devastating, absolutely devastating. And like I just described, if they have any previously existing trauma, it is so devastating that it actually triggers all of that too. So you can imagine then the way that there's a huge vulnerability to that partner when she makes this discovery and she has this happen inside her body. She has so much more vulnerability to the adversary's influence in terms of stepping up the trauma that she's experiencing in the moment. The triggers become harder to deal with. The PTSD becomes harder to deal with because of the way that the adversary interacts with her on that, bringing all those memories.
Now, just to clarify, when you say there's a lot of support, are you referring to group support, therapeutic support? Like what exactly are you referring to when you say support? Is this
Right.
simply a group therapy type support, or is there clinicians? Is there, like, what exactly are you getting out of Worth?
Thank you for asking those questions. Worth program, Worth stands for Women of, hang on a second, I always forget this. Women of Rebirth Therapeutic Healing. So what we can experience in Worth is we can come in and there's like a free class that meets on Monday. We can learn about betrayal trauma. It's 6 weeks, rotated. Kara Bagley teaches that class and it is free. That's such an awesome opportunity right there for women to find out what they're living with inside their bodies and why things are so confusing for them. And then after that, they can be placed, if they so choose, into a Worth group. The Worth groups, they have both mentor-led and they have therapist-led. And the therapists have experience with betrayal trauma. They're trained in experience with how to help women who are dealing with it. And they can participate in that for an exceedingly affordable rate. I don't know of any program that offers a more affordable option for the level of care and support that these women receive in their Worth groups.
Wow. That's crazy. And they definitely deserve it. Man, that just that whole description got the warrior chemistry going. Like how can this happen? And then we're paying $60 a week on for our recovery, and I think that's worth it too. It's part of the grind, part of the motivation.
Yeah. I mean, and it sounds like there's fantastic support for the women, just like you said. There's something for everybody, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of women don't realize how long it takes to heal from this trauma. Like we come into it and we're thinking, "Oh, I am so determined to kick this."
Right.
I know I was. And I thought, oh, it'll be a year, year and a half. I will be back to myself. Nope. Nope. I am 3 years out and still discovering healing that I need to do.
Mm.
It can take
Yeah.
anywhere from 3 to 10 years to heal from betrayal trauma. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I mean, we'll probably go more into this with Daughters of Light, but I'm just thinking back from group, women have pornography addictions? What? That's such a shock to any young man. Like, no, we're just gross boys and that's what we do. It's not a women thing. They're perfect. You know? And they can handle whatever we dump on them.
Yeah, it's part of the stereotype that we don't address often, that we just assume the guys may or may not have it, but they're the likely ones to have it, and then we forget about other possibilities or the other trauma that we may be causing, right? It's pretty easy to forget that we're causing trauma like that.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you guys are willing to hear that, because it can be a hard thing to hear. It's not something that people generally want to hear. So
yeah,
right.
It can be very tough to sit down and tell yourself and say, I am hurting other people. Right? That's a hard thing to admit to yourself, because you know, I believe we're good people. You know, each of us has a good person inside of us, and having to shoot that good person inside of us with a shot of humble pie.
Yeah. I mean,
it's part of the lie that the adversary tells you, though, isn't it? Like that this is something that's between you and whatever you choose.
It doesn't hurt anyone else.
Not touching anyone else. I mean, that's part of that lie, that deception.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I doubt either one of you went into this thinking, oh, I'm going to choose this thing that I know is going to absolutely devastate my partner to the extent that she won't want to live anymore. Like,
right.
That's not on your mind.
Oh, man.
For sure.
Oh, man, that's crazy. Yeah. And that's a big step of just joining group and being a part of recovery. Like if the guy isn't in recovery yet, then there's no way he's going to be able to hear this. Like his mind won't even be open to the possibility that he's hurting someone until he is seeking help. So that's a big thing.
Now, speaking of that, speaking of the progressing in recovery, you said you joined the W.O.R.T.H group. How did you get from there to, being an integral part, teaching with Maurice?
Yeah. So
you got me,
that's a story that I never thought would happen. So I was doing my W.O.R.T.H program thing, and I happen to have ADHD, and my ADHD shows up.
Why do you put the emphasis on the H? I'm sorry, that's such a distraction, but I hear people do that. I'm like, ADHD, and I'm like, what does that mean?
That's because of the way that we're supposed to say it now. I never would have said it with the H. But if you think about it from the perspective of the way that your thoughts become difficult to keep track of, that's where my hyperactivity shows up, not so much externally. I'm not a very hyperactive person.
So you have to make the H faster. ADHD. Hype.
Now that we have that sorted,
sorry.
we can talk about that too sometime. But for me, I find that I feel like I have more control in situations that I don't have control of when I can study and learn as much as I can about them. So this matters to the story.
So would this be an example of hyper focus that is common with some cases of ADHD?
Yeah. Yeah. So here I am. I'm in this traumatized state where what I thought I was dealing with just became exponentially harder, so much worse. I'm drowning and I'm seeking for any kind of distraction slash insight on what I'm dealing with. So for me, that looked like a deep dive, not just into support groups, but also into education, learning what I could about all of this. So I also had a background as a psychology major in college. So for me, this was
Okay.
really up my alley of learning. So I had access to, once I joined W.O.R.T.H, I had access to the W.O.R.T.H Dropbox. And the W.O.R.T Dropbox is a wealth of recorded information. So I suddenly found myself basically deep diving, listening to everything in the W.O.R.T Dropbox.
What
This
exactly
meant that I
is?
learned.
Sorry, what exactly is the W.O.R.T Dropbox? Is it just like recordings of every meeting? Is that what we're talking about? What is the W.O.R.T
No,
Dropbox?
no. There were webinars that some of the women who work with W.O.R.T did at different points, and those were recorded.
Okay.
In addition to that, all of Maurice's, well, most of Maurice's Q&As that he did with the W.O.R.T program are all in there,
I
or at
see.
least they were. People are moving things around, but yeah. So I
Gotcha.
found those at the time, and I listened to multiple years of those Q&As, and I listened to like all the webinars that were recorded where there were teachings that were just worth saving, and I learned a lot about life-changing services that way.
For sure.
And then after I learned about life-changing services through that, I was also looking for podcasts, and that's when I found the Eternal Warriors podcast. And I
Woohoo!
was listening to that.
To our
Yeah, name
predecessors.
drop.
Yep.
Wes
The
and
Earth,
Spenny all the way.
Wes and Spenny, all the way. And I was so excited to find it. It had so much wonderful energy and gave me so much hope. And after looking into that, I was looking for other podcasts and other things that could provide more insight as well. I learned that there is an Eternal Warriors program. I was like, I want to do that someday, but I couldn't afford it. So I was like, I guess I won't be doing that right away. And then I found the Mothers Who Know program, and I learned they had a free meeting that met on Tuesdays. So I started attending that. It was when I was attending one of those meetings, which are awesome, so encouraging, so supportive, and so welcoming. I absolutely love their program. So
We'll have to get
there I
somebody
was.
from them. We'll have to get
Yeah.
somebody
Yes,
from their group too.
I would love that. I would love
I
that.
like this. Sounds like the speed is picking up, and you're starting to dive headfirst into all these things.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was like kind of feeling led, like I need to immerse in these ways. And so anyway, there I was in a Q&A with Maurice that he did with the Mothers Who Know program. And those are awesome. So I'm listening, and he drops a link in the Zoom saying everyone who's on this Zoom right now can start attending the Eternal Warriors 3.0 meetings on Monday. And I'm like, I get to go. I get to go. I was so excited. And so I started attending over there. And it was during one of the first ones of those that I was attending when somebody dropped the Passion Project group link for the Zoom that met right after that into that chat. And I'm like, what is this? And I'm so curious. So, of course, I jumped in, and there I was.
And that's where we met you.
I had no idea what I was into. Maurice is like, why are you here? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just here to watch and listen.
That's the best way to join
Perfect honesty.
any of meetings. Any of Maurice's meetings right there. I don't know. I'm so glad you did. And that's where our stories converge.
Yes, that's
That's
how
when
I
we
started
met
doing
each
things.
other.
I didn't have any project though, and he was like, "Do you have some project you're working on?" And I'm like, "I have no, not really." A couple months later, I had been thinking about something because I knew he was going to come back and ask me again, and I fortunately had something to offer. I thought I was going to do a podcast because I had found
Mm.
this concept of mutualizing language and how that was showing up in patterns of abuse. And I didn't
Mm.
understand yet how much I wanted to get into it. I just knew that it was a conversation that wasn't being had and had a place to help women to untangle some of the crazy that they were living with and exercise their agency more effectively towards understanding truth. So
Right.
I wanted to do a podcast. And when I brought it up to Maurice in December, he said, "Well, what about a webinar?" And I'm like, "Okay, what about a webinar?" And found myself co-teaching with Maurice like a month and a half later.
I have to say, you have some of the best responses to Maurice. Why are you in this meeting? I don't know. What about a webinar? What about a webinar? Perfect response.
That is so Maurice. I've known him for like 5 years now, and that is so Maurice. Let's just start a new class,
We'll have to
All
get
right.
Maurice on here one of these days.
Oh yeah, definitely. So now we're here, I guess. Were there any more details in the build-up, or are we ready to launch into mutualizing language?
Well, I think as far as the abuse component, like I didn't realize what I was living with in terms of patterns of abuse. I attributed a lot of what I was experiencing with my husband to his neurodiversity because he has Asperger's syndrome. And
Right.
so there was a certain amount of confusion regarding our interactions already from that perspective. I learned about a month before Discovery Day, when I learned about the pornography addiction that was part of our marriage the whole time. I had already discovered a month earlier that I was dealing with financial abuse. And then after that, and after Discovery, I started looking a little more intensely at other patterns that we were living with that were not comfortable and showing up in ways that were creating further confusion. And then I understood the relationship of abuse and pornography addiction or sex addiction.
Interesting.
And that shows up as a protective mechanism in the addict brain to hide and protect their acting out behaviors, their addiction.
Right.
And so I don't even know how much my husband was aware of the way that he was interacting with me. But I was aware that I was feeling increasingly unsafe. The more I was looking at things, the more I was noticing that there were unhealthy patterns.
For sure.
So that was part of what I was deep diving to understand. I wanted to understand all the ways that gaslighting was showing up, all the ways Darva was showing up, all the ways blame shifting was showing up. Because the more that I understood, the more that I could also tease apart what was healthy and what was not healthy about the ways that we were interacting. And the more I could exercise my agency towards believing truth rather than believing lies.
I gotta say, it is to that point, it's so scary as a man, not being aware of these things, because I definitely, throughout my dating experience, realized too late in the game that I was having patterns that were pushing girls away. That were, as Maurice describes it in the Like Dragons Did They Fight book, I was setting off their creepy guy detector. And it was a whole thing. And realizing that, I got really, really scared, because I'm like, what am I doing? I don't want to be abusive. I don't want to like mislead people. But it seems to just be happening. And so I think this is a really good conversation to have, so that, if men are listening, and they probably will be, well, what do we do? How do we change that? All right. So mutualizing language.
Wait, before we get into that, I just would like to say that, Susan, I feel like you exemplify the principle of first seek to obtain my word. The whole process that you went through just seems like you were prepared and ready to seek any amount of knowledge that you could in order to understand first. And I'm sure that's exactly how Christ wants us to do it, right? He wants us to seek things out. He wants us to learn, to understand, and then we can seek to teach others, but also seek to use that word effectively. So, thank you for doing that. That's amazing.
Thank you so much. No one's ever said that before. Yeah, no,
Right.
I'm so encouraged that you guys are choosing to be so accepting as I share this, because I was really nervous to say this stuff.
Of course. I mean, that's what we're here for.
So I think the first thing that's helpful is to have a willing mind, because when we don't have a willing mind, we aren't going to learn. We're just going to be pushing that knowledge away, and we're going to be just living in a place of denial that there's anything to learn. And so being willing to learn, having a curiosity to understand, having a desire to show up in ways that create safety, that's a really good place to start.
Right.
I think it can be difficult for men who are dealing with these patterns of addiction to sit with discomfort. I think Garrett hiccuped.
I
with
did
his
hiccup.
audio.
Just a little bit.
But what I was saying was, how do you know or recognize that you're willing to learn? You know what I mean? Because certainly in the past, I've assumed that I was willing to learn, only to recognize later that I certainly wasn't.
I think it's a trial and error situation there.
Yeah.
And I think that if you know that it's something that is going to be a little more challenging, like, for example, you're still working on being able to sit with discomfort,
right,
and take accountability for things that maybe you aren't very proud of once you discover that it was a thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Start with
and
prayer.
Knowing, yeah.
I mean, that's always a good option.
I know, right? Like, we don't think of that, but it is a good thing to start with when you're going into a situation that could be overwhelming, that could challenge you. I mean, we do that when we're going into an exam.
Well, I certainly hope everyone does. I mean, I certainly pray before every exam, but
oh goodness me, I always do.
Please help me. Maybe I'm a little too confident. Maybe I'm a little too confident in myself.
Eli's like, I'm that good.
I might be praying
try
last
to be.
minute as I walk into the exam room, but there is always some sort of prayer involved.
Right. So, okay. So mutualizing language.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us like a definition? Like what the heck does mutualizing even mean?
Yeah. So, in terms of the patterns of abuse that can show up, this is a really common one. And this is something that happens, lest we feel too targeted, across the board throughout all of language and society. Like, this is something that shows up all over the place, especially in recovery spaces. So, for example, me as a betrayed woman, as a betrayed wife, I'm going into a lot of different spaces of recovery learning and support. And I'm coming across this language being given to me in terms that seem to be providing insight about recovery and healing and stuff like that. And it's not safe for me, because what it does is, when mutualizing language occurs in a way that is not safe, what it does is it equates accountability for whatever situation happened as being equal. If that's not actually accurate, then it's happening in an unsafe way. Because if it's a power dynamic that is different, with someone exerting power over because they're maybe withholding information or
Right.
retaining a secret, or have a pattern of doing so in the past, so they're not able to show up with full integrity in their interactions as their brain is still healing. So that creates a power over dynamic. Their partner is operating without full information. She doesn't have full disclosure all the time. She can't be a mind reader.
Right.
And if somebody isn't sharing information with her, she's not going to have the full picture.
For sure.
So, unless God tells her, and he will, just so you know. But
Beware, men.
No,
God is with
seriously.
your wife.
That's
My
right.
husband is not-
God is with your wife. That's if you learn anything else, God is with your wife.
Yeah.
That's
My husband is
Thank
not working
goodness for
recovery,
that.
so I can speak from some measure of experience with this.
right.
God does not leave me in the dark.
For sure.
So, so there is a power over dynamic happening when someone is withholding information, keeping secrets, not disclosing exactly what's happening in their brain or with their choices, misleading their partner in some capacity, or creating language patterns that do what I'm talking about with this mutualizing, with this equating of accountability for situations that are bred out of this power over dynamic, where there isn't technically shared accountability for the exercise of agency. Because if someone has a power over dynamic, that is inherently abusive.
It's so mutualizing language is a language structure where it's like the words you tend to use in conversation that like subtly shifts the dynamic between you and your spouse. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, to where well, you and your spouse, you and someone else. I mean, again, this is common throughout society.
Right.
And what it does is it equates the level of accountability between the person exerting power over and the victim of that experience.
Okay.
Interesting.
So the partner under becomes part of the accountability of the partner over. So
interesting.
instead of like if one guy does something, then it's both their faults. Is that kind of what I'm getting at?
So, one common way this can show up is when somebody says that they are in an abusive relationship. Okay. So, the word relationship mutualizes abuse.
Oh. Really?
When you say relationship, you're thinking of somebody with like a shared experience with a partner, and it's kind of more of a mutual situation. Shared experience, shared agency, shared, everything. That's the relationship.
I
Except
didn't think of that.
when we're saying abusive, two things are happening. We're recognizing abuse is present. And when abuse is present, there's a power over dynamic in every situation. There's some measure of unshared information or unshared power. It could be physical, it could be all sorts of different ways. Financial. So that power over dynamic creates a situation where there is, for lack of a better word, a perpetrator or a power over partner and a victim. And I don't like using the word partner because when we're talking about situations where partnership happens, we don't think of it as being abusive.
Right.
So that is also mutualizing that word. So if we say relationship or partner, then we're creating an assumption of assumed accountability between both partners. But that's not accurate. That's not accurate because wherever abuse is happening, there is a victim.
Right.
And when we don't recognize the perpetrator or the victim, and we confuse that accountability, then we'll assume it's a she in this case, the victim, isn't receiving the support that she needs. And he isn't receiving the support that he needs either. Because he doesn't know what he's doing because he's busy denying it. And she's over here experiencing it, and she may not be fully aware because people are telling her it's your relationship. You need to work on your communication.
So the correct way to view this would be that, I guess, recognizing that whoever the perpetrator is, the abuser in this case, is recognizing that, as they sin, as they fall, as they lose battles, it is in no part the fault of significant other, right? It's their fault, and then them recognizing that, but also recognizing the harm that they have on the other, and recognizing the roles, I guess, in the relationship is what we're talking about, the proper roles to have a healthy relationship. That's what we're shooting for.
Yeah. The more we can understand accurately what the landscape is happening between us, the more we can exercise our agency towards healthier patterns, towards protecting ourselves, towards creating something beautiful and good instead of perpetuating patterns of destruction. Because when she doesn't recognize what she's living with, she doesn't have the power to use her agency effectively towards safety.
Right.
And he doesn't have the power to exercise his agency towards supporting safety for her.
Right.
Should he even be willing to choose that?
So,
that's rough.
For the sake of our audience, right? Because we assume that we'll have women, but we'll also have men. And finding out that as men, we are causing this pain and we are causing this, or even the perpetrators of this abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Say we do want to recognize where we're falling short.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that? As from our side,
Right. Well, you would want to learn what words do this, which words are doing this. And so, for example, we talked about abusive relationship. Well, it's not the relationship that's abusive, it's actually the abusing partner that's abusive in that relationship. So,
So
noticing.
my partner is abusing me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not the relationship, it's the partner. It's not a relationship problem.
right?
And that's why it's contraindicated, right, for marriages where there's addiction or abuse happening to go to couples counseling, because there's an assumption when you're in couples counseling that both partners are showing up fully accountable for everything they're bringing to the situation, and somebody who's busy hiding isn't able to do that.
Like they both have problems.
Mm-hmm.
But when in reality it's
Mm-hmm.
whoever's on top.
What we can understand too, when we recognize that there's a victim in the situation, we can also recognize her acts of resistance. People will talk about reactive abuse. That's not actually a thing. More often than not, we can notice that those patterns are where she is attempting to choose safety, to create safety. She's responding to the situation that she's in. If she wasn't experiencing these patterns of abuse, she would be responding differently. Because when we recognize that abuse is present, we recognize the environment that the victim is subjected to.
Okay. So I suppose playing devil's advocate here. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just curious because this is the thoughts that are going to run through a lot of people's heads. Would that then apply that, or would that then imply that once abused, you have no accountability for further abuse?
The victim is operating from a power down position, as Eli was mentioning earlier. So she doesn't have the advantage. Right. It would be like saying a 5-year-old child has accountability for the way their parent shows up.
Okay, so I get that. So from a power up position to the power down, right? The power down can't be abusive in reverse to the power up position, but a lot of times that abuse can transfer, right? Because they can't truly be abusive to the power up position, right? That transfers to somebody else who is, for lack of a better way of putting it, beneath, further beneath them on the power scale, right?
Yeah.
At that point, do they have some accountability for their actions?
They do in that setting, yes. They do in that setting. Because we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about a power over dynamic. So,
So you were talking about reactive abuse, and saying that's not a thing, and wow, myth busted.
Yes, I could provide supporting evidence. I wasn't really expecting to talk about it much, though.
Yeah. So is that one of the signs that men should look for if they feel like they're being abused by their wife? Should they take a moment to think, are they abusing me, or are they reacting to some abuse that I'm giving them?
That could be a way to discover a pattern. I think that's actually a brilliant way of thinking about it, Eli.
Woo.
Yeah.
I did something right.
Because well, it's just like Joseph Smith said, right? When someone was talking to him about their experience and complaining and whatnot. And he said, when I experience these situations where someone comes up and complains to me about something I did, I first take a look and see where did I have a role of accountability in that situation. So
That's an epic quote. What?
yeah.
Do you know where that's from? I'm gonna have to look that up.
I'm sorry, I don't know where that's from.
It's okay. I have the BYU citation app, and I will look that
I'm
up.
sure you can find it.
So,
that's one way that you can maybe untangle where things might be going sideways in your relationship, is coming at it from that direction. Like when you feel this and when you see some things and you're like, why is she being like this? Track it back and see if there was a power over situation that happened somewhere along the way that she might be responding to, whether she realizes it or not.
Yeah.
Is there danger in, I guess, constantly viewing your relationship in terms of power dynamics?
This is something to notice as long as there are reasons, right, that a person would potentially be showing up this way.
Okay.
Because we don't want to perpetuate harm to our loved ones.
Yeah.
And so when we can do this, when we can notice when and how these things might be happening, again, we then are empowered to exercise our agency towards healthier choices.
So if to put an analogy to it, this is like chemo rather than a diet. Right? This is something that we do once. This is something that we recognize and address once we're in, a cancerous situation. Whereas dieting is something we do all the time to make sure we stay healthy. So this is the chemo category, not the diet and.
Right.
Yeah.
But while one is dealing with overcoming the cancer, there is a need to be more vigilant and take extra care.
Of course.
To notice.
Just like a real person overcoming cancer, right? You would expect them to be more vigilant with their health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great allusion to illusion, not illusion. To Like Dragons, Did They Fight? I'm pretty sure it's in there. It's the story of tending your garden, and if it's all overgrown with weeds, you take a flamethrower to it and you burn it all down. Like, there's nothing left to do if you need to start over in making your brain or making a relationship. Like, you need to take some pretty drastic measures at the beginning. But once you start having flowers growing and you just get weeds every now and then, it wouldn't be very productive to take a flamethrower to it again, because then you'll destroy all the good that you've worked so hard to get.
Right.
So yeah, I really like that perspective. I'm really excited. Are there any more examples you have or words you have of mutualizing language?
Oh, yeah. Real quick before we move on, you said something a while back, and it just occurred to me that I'd never asked the question I had. You said that there are triggering words, or not necessarily triggering words, but words that indicate that power dynamic, that take advantage of the power dynamic. Are those words universal, or are those words that are unique to every relationship?
There are some that are more common.
Okay.
And then there are some that might be ones that you recognize more frequently in your personal relationship.
Right. Okay. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
as much as we try to be general, we're very individual people.
So in politics, to lighten
Oh.
this a little bit, in politics,
Yeah, that's a very light subject.
politicians will say, such and such happened, right? So,
Okay.
but really, I mean, when does something happen without someone exerting agency?
Right. They've removed fault in the situation.
Right. So now what does that mean? It means we're obscuring accountability and agency and hiding our accountability at the same time because it's obscured. So functionally, that politician has now hidden accountability in a scenario that maybe they don't want to be accepting that accountability for.
Yeah, especially in situations where, it was a result of someone's agency that it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you correct them then to say it more accurately?
So this could show up in everyday language in the home.
For sure.
And instead of saying something happened in the kitchen, we could say what actually happened. He verbally attacked me in the kitchen this morning, which is not fun to say. And yet maybe that is exactly what happened. And that's what we aren't saying when we say something happened in the kitchen this morning, or we had a fight in the kitchen this morning. Like, no, it wasn't a fight, because fight implies mutual accountability. What happened was that the one who exerted the power over dynamic, in this case, probably the husband, not always, probably the husband, approached the situation aggressively and then verbally attacked instead of engaging in a relational conversation with their partner, who thought that's what she was going to be experiencing with her husband that morning.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That sounds like it takes some real discernment to recognize, because I feel like there are situations where it's not being helped by either side. Like, they're both approaching the situation aggressively. But if if you've really looked at this situation and you didn't approach it aggressively, and that's got to be hard, because from what I know, like, you women just want to blame yourselves all the time.
Well, and to be fair, Eli, like, when you've got neurodiversity as part of the mix, there are times when my husband perceives threat from me when I'm not in any way giving threat. I'm like one of the kindest people, and I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back here. Most of my friends keep telling me this, so I'm taking it in good faith that they're telling the truth, and yet my husband will perceive threat where there is none. Now, he has a choice about what he chooses to believe, just like I have a choice about what I choose to believe. When he comes at me aggressively and he's being verbally abusive and attacking me, then I have a choice to believe that or not. It still damages me to experience it, but I don't have to retain it as a belief in my mind that isn't true. So if he's saying, oh, I did this because you blah, 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 and I'm over here going, but I didn't do that. And I know that's true. Then I have a choice about believing him when he says I did something that I didn't do, or instead believing the truth. So what I tell my abused wives who are experiencing betrayal trauma is, You have a choice. You can say to yourself in that moment, the truth is, and whatever you understand the truth to be. You don't have to believe what your husband's telling you. And then
Right.
check in with the Lord, remind yourself who you are in that situation so that you can show up in integrity in that situation. And then hopefully over time, he heals and he shows up more and more in integrity as a son of God. But we don't have control over our partners either way.
Right. This reminds me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They take as much time on that first step as they probably should.
Yeah.
Learning to be honest with yourself. And it sounds to me like in this situation where we have this mutualizing language in a negative way, what you have is a someone in the power up position who's not honest with themselves. And oftentimes, because of the trauma experienced by the power down position, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not being honest with themselves. And so both, both entities in this interaction are dishonest with themselves. And that's pretty damning. And I guess you got to start somewhere, right? One or the other has to start being honest with themselves. But the hope is that once one starts being honest, the other one will too. And that's where growth can happen.
And that's where, honestly, the one who has the power over position in that dynamic, when they choose what you're talking about, Garrett, it's so influential to the whole situation. Because most often, the victim, when she's not choosing honesty, it's because she's believing the lies she's being told.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's believing the lies the adversary is piggybacking onto what she's experiencing too.
Right.
It undermines her confidence and ability to discern truth and to show up with accountability for herself.
Yeah.
So what happens when he changes? She suddenly has a safer situation.
Yeah.
She has the opportunity then to notice things about herself and what she's living with and begin healing.
For sure.
She does not have to wait for him to start healing. She can still choose healing. She can still choose differently. It's just going to be harder while she's in that situation in her life.
Healing is going to occur more rapidly with support than without it.
Mm-hmm. Naturally, right? Because when he's showing up, like Maurice talks about, where he's creating that greenhouse situation for her to heal, he uses that metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
How empowering that is. What a gift to his partner to create that safe space for her to experience the healing that she needs. And it'll be hard for her to accept that because this is the person that's caused the pain.
For sure.
But the more stubbornly he continues to choose that for her, the more that is creating safety and supporting her healing.
Man, that's tough.
So, yeah,
all of this it's fascinating in a morbid sort of way. It's fascinating in that recognizing the role we can have in either worsening their trauma or catalyzing their recovery is huge, right? we as men have
Yeah.
that much influence in it if we're willing to step up to the plate.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
that's
scary.
that's a beautiful thing. It is scary, and yet it's beautiful at the same time. A lot of times our greatest growth happens when we face down the greatest scary whatever it is. And when we are willing to face that down and confront that and choose accountability and choose to recognize the areas and the places where we can exercise our agency for good, it's so influential. And the Lord blesses our efforts.
That's awesome.
So,
Uh,
another way this can show up is when
hmm.
I lost it.
I mean, it might be. So we've reached our hour mark. And this, it feels like a great end, but I know there's a lot of examples of mutualizing language. Do you think
Yeah, we
maybe
didn't
you
have
could
time
send
for that.
us? Do you think you could send us like a list of phrases that are this harmful mutualizing language, and we can put it in the chat description?
Mhm.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
that would be awesome.
to finish
Okay.
things off
I can put
for
something
us.
together.
Yeah. To finish things off for us, Susan, would you mind sharing why it is you're fighting? Why do you do the things you do? What motivates you?
So, when Discovery Day happened for me, it was incredibly devastating. Um, I was already fighting an uphill struggle throughout the nearly 2 decades long marriage that I was in. And the realization of the levels of trauma I experienced prior to that. I was working on my relationship with my Heavenly Father and attempting to heal a lot of things. When Discovery happened, it felt like my world went completely sideways and then turned inside out and disintegrated. I did not know how I was going to navigate any kind of healing because I couldn't imagine my husband ever choosing to be accountable. And I knew I wasn't prepared to be on my own. Um, was embarking on a long journey of healing at the time. So I went into this struggling with severe depression, struggling with undiagnosed ADHD that I had no idea I was dealing with. Um, and this made all of that so much more severe. I confronted pretty quickly the realization that the only possible way for me to have any safety in the context of my relationship with my husband or my relationship with myself was to lean as much as I possibly could on my Savior. So I think if I was to say why I fight, it's ultimately at the root a battle to continually, as much as possible, be close to my Savior. When I experience the feeling of His love, that is the thing that overcomes my depression. That is the thing that overcomes everything for me. That is the place where I can feel safety no matter what. And that is the thing that I want most in my life. And it brings me joy to know that others can experience that too. So every time I have a chance to share something with others that can help them untangle lies of deceit, I know that they have a chance to feel that. And that's something that motivates me to continue to do hard things, to choose things that I wouldn't have the confidence to choose otherwise. I'm fighting to stay with my Savior and walk by His side to minister to others.
That's amazing. Susan, we applaud your fight. It's
Thank you.
Inspirational, and we appreciate all your insight today. And to our audience, I guess, we hope you received the same level of insight and wonder from today's lesson as we did. Thank you, Susan. And I guess until next time.
Thank you. If you guys want me to come back and talk about anything else related to this topic, feel free to extend the invitation. I'd be happy to come back.
Right. Thank you so much. And yeah, I know you're doing a lot of good for a lot of people out there. We'll be sure to leave links to things we've mentioned in here so that any of you guys in listener land, you can get the support you need, whether it's women going through trauma, whether it's men or young boys struggling through pornography, couples struggling through pornography addiction. It's all at lifechangingservices.org. And yeah, until we meet again, promise to be of service to you and allow you to be of service to me until both you and I successfully defeat this demon that assails us.
Absolutely.
Whew. If you're listening to this podcast, you have probably found that you are in need of, you are strongly desiring, a level of self-mastery that you have not been able to achieve on your own, or you are a loved one or a parent who knows someone who would like to achieve that level of self-mastery. It's not fun to be in that situation. Been there, done that. I've become a specialist in this area by spending 30 years initially searching for and harvesting eternal principles found in the world of psychology, science, and the words of the prophets, many of them found in the Book of Mormon, for my own sake first, and then I found that they're of great value to others. Instead of just hoarding these concepts, we put them into a book form that is easy for you to access. Like Dragons Did They Fight? You'll understand the reason why it's called that when you start reading it. But go to likedragonsfree.com, get your own free copy of it, download it, and then when you're ready to talk over your circumstances and make a battle plan, Call 877-HERO-877. In other words, 877-4376. Talk to our headquarters people, and if necessary, they'll arrange for you to have a consultation with me. I am sad that you're going through this, but I've watched thousands and thousands of young warriors gain the confidence and strength they need to be able to have the lives they want now and the futures they desire to have. We will see you soon.